Pop quiz. Think of your favorite locomotive. No, not that one. Think of one people like and was actually built in big numbers. Maybe the USRA Mikados, Pacifics, the S-160?
How about the Grand Trunks Pacifics?
Huh? AmtrakGuy365? How do you get here?
That doesn't matter. I heard you were going to finally talk about a Russian locomotive.
How did... Damn it, I knew I shouldn't have left the door open. Yes, we're talking about a Russian locomotive.
Yes, finally!
Now, I have a very important assignment for you. Add up the steam locomotives operated by the Grand Trunk.
Huh? Well, there's the...
Russia is a big country, so naturally, Russia had a lot of steam locomotives, and still does. The most numerous before World War I was the O-class 080s. These low, squat, and powerful machines were built in large numbers, but even the large amount of them, plus 280s, did not prove to be enough when Russia joined World War I in 1914. A larger design was required, and engineers figured out why fix what already works. They added an extra set of driving wheels to the existing O-class, got rid of the squat looks, and came up with the E-class, a freight O10O. Unfortunately, because of the war and a lack of ability to construct them quickly, saw the Russian railways reach out to the USA for assistance, which would lead to the Russian Decapod, a 210O based on the E-class. Now, Russia originally wanted it to be an O10O as well, but its heavier axle loading than the existing E required a pilot truck be added. Now, the Russian Decapods, as they were known, were a reliable design and one I'll surely come back to, but this marked the beginning of the domination of the Russian railway by a lowly freight engine, the E-class. Now, by the end of their production date in 1952, the E-class and various subclasses were very numerous. If we add up the S100, S118, S160, S200, then throw in the Liberty and Victory ships for good measure, we only come up with about half the total of E-class O10Os built. But current estimations for these locomotives are somewhere between 10,000 and 11,000.
And those O-class 080s are second to that, racking in at just under 10,000. They held the most constructed class of locomotives record until the E smashed it.
The E-class domination started slow, as Russia didn't have the manufacturing capacity. The first big batch of 1,000 were ordered from NOHAB. These were classed as the ESCH, which stood for Sweden, where NOHAB was based. Shipping these locomotives to Russia was problematic due to differences in track gauge, which eventually resulted in the rest of the batch being shipped by boat, although the full 1,000 was not delivered. Instead, only 500 were, with another 700 being built by various German manufacturers, these in turn becoming the EG, with G standing for German. By the end of the 1920s, E-class production was being done in Russia, although industrial limitations still plagued locomotive construction. This resulted in 2,535 EU subtypes, which were equipped with superheating. Following these locomotives, two experimental types were produced by Alco and Baldwin, the TA and TB 210-4 and 210-2 respectively. These were thoroughly modern designs for 1931, and in most countries, these locomotives would push a 10-couple design with no pilot or trailing truck off the main lines, but...
not in Russia.
Well, 1931 also saw the introduction of the nearly 3,000 strong class of FD-20s, a class of 210-2s that some say would inspire China's own QJ in the 1950s. The E's were still coming, with another sub-batch arriving in 1932. This time it was classed EM, with the M standing for modified, as these 2,325 engines had a higher boiler pressure, although some of their modifications had made their axle loading a bit weird, so they were restricted from lightly laid branch lines. Some of them were also equipped with condensing equipment for lines where water was scarce. After an experiment with a Garrett and, that thing...
I have a video about it that you can go and watch.
Another batch rolled out, the Type ER. These would be the most numerous E-class batch, and finally ditched the teens-era front porch design of earlier Russian steam. They continued to build them too, and it seemed every new engine to supersede them would be followed by more E's.
Two classes of SO210Os were built alongside the E-class from the 1930s on, and another batch of FDs were built in the early 40s. You have to add all three together to get more than the 3,403 E's built over the same time period between 1934 and 1955.
The E's continue to find a niche all over Russia's massive system, working all types of trains in all sorts of places, though no more E's would be built after 1955, as a year later, the 20th Communist Party Conference decided the railways would embark on a modernization plan, with the last two mainline steam designs finishing construction in the same year in numbers nowhere near as high as the E and other designs. These being the P-36, of which only a lowly 251 were built, and the Peak Freight Design LV, a 210-2, of which only 522 were built. Both were fairly modern locomotives and showed development of the Russian steam fleet, but both came too late. The modernization plan started in earnest, but the E-class engines really weren't affected by it for several reasons. For one, some were in such far-flung corners of the USSR it wasn't practical to electrify, and putting in diesel infrastructure didn't make sense. Despite their size, these were all accounts branch line engines, and by the time of modernization, the second smallest class of tender engines rostered by the railway. The second reason was, of course, the Cold War. Russia took many locomotives, including E's, and would store them in cold storage, serviceable in case war did break out and the grid was taken down. The USSR is a fun case here, as of course, they weren't very happy about us Westerners getting in and photographing their trains, so very few in-service photos exist of these engines. However, when the Berlin Wall came down, Westerners did get a chance to see Russian steam in Ukraine, where the E's were very plentiful doing their usual mixed traffic work. At the turn of the new millennium, the E's were still steaming, although in Ukraine mostly for charter work. Russia too has slowly developed a sizable stable of operating examples, most of them being plucked from the Cold War serviceable lines, which by the 1990s had gone from a reserve to lines of rusted and scrap condition locomotives. As of writing, despite tensions, Ukraine has at least one serviceable E-class for tourism, while Russia maintains several examples for use a few times a year on excursions or special events. Preservation-wise, it's hard to know how many are still around, as they're fairly well scattered across the former USSR, although only Ukraine and Russia have operational examples. At least for now. The E is definitely one of the greats in steam. I mean, heck, they're in Guinness for how many were produced. And to me they're quite unique, as O10O road engines are absolutely bonkers. To quote Marge Simpson, I just think they're neat.
Okay, so when are you going to talk about the P-36?
Thanks for watching! The E's have definitely been on my list for a while, honestly since I started this whole idea, and they're definitely on that Liam wants to see them in person list. If you liked the video, bonk the like button and maybe subscribe. I appreciate a review, and thanks to AmtrakGuy365 for being a part of this one.